This is the Unitarian Universalist Church of Indianapolis. Sermon for May 2nd, 2021, Beyond Thoughts and Prayers by Jamie Hinson-Rieger. Just a note, the subject of today's sermon is gun violence, and while it is not graphic, it may be inappropriate for younger listeners. There's a satirical website called The Onion that's been around for decades now, whose stock and trade is fake news stories. You've probably heard of The Onion. It dates back to like the 90s or before. And they've been running a particular fake news story over and over again for many years now. The headline of the news story is, "No way to prevent this, says only nation where this regularly happens." The story was first run in 2014 after a mass shooting in California. They have rerun the article 18 times since then, each time after another mass shooting. Each time the text of the article remains essentially the same, only the date and location change. The closing lines of the article are, "At press time, residents of the only economically advanced nation in the world where roughly 2 mass shootings have occurred every month for the past 8 years were referring to themselves and their situation as helpless." On April 16th, The Onion reran this story again, this time Dateline Indianapolis. After a gunman at a FedEx facility here in Indianapolis killed 8 people and wounded 5 others before taking his own life. The oldest victim was 74, the youngest was 19. The mass shooting at the FedEx facility, as shocking as it was, is just one tragedy, one act of terrible violence in a long procession of violence, of death by gun, that is the reality of life in America. In just the first 4 months of this year, by April 21st, here in Indianapolis, we have seen 78 lives lost to gun violence. The FedEx shooting was not the first or even the second mass shooting of the year here in Indianapolis. It was the 3rd mass shooting in Indianapolis this year. It's easy to become numb to this violence. But these are some of the terrible statistics we cannot and must not allow ourselves to become desensitized to. These statistics were offered at a vigil here in Butler, Tarkington this past Sunday to remember the victims of gun violence and to call on our elected officials for action. And these are the statistics. Nearly 40,000 Americans die by guns each year in this country. Approximately 1,000 of those deaths happen here in Indiana every year, including 100 Hoosier children and youth. About 60% of these gun violence deaths are the result of self-inflicted harm. A small percentage are accidental, and about 40% are the result of homicides or domestic disputes where the violence is intentional. 58% of American adults or someone they care for have experienced gun violence in their lifetime. Gun violence is the leading cause of death for children and teens in the United States, including here in Indiana. Approximately 3 million American children witness gun violence every year. A child born in this country is 25 times more likely to be killed by gun than children born in the other high-income countries around the world. The United States is, in fact, a staggering outlier in its level of gun violence compared to other wealthy, politically stable countries. Other countries have poverty, they have mental illness, domestic violence, crime, gangs, bad parenting, and violent video games too, the usual explanations brought out to explain gun violence when there is yet another mass shooting in the news. What America has, in addition to all those things I mentioned, is 393 million guns, and a political system that is captured by gun culture and resists any attempt to control or regulate access to these lethal weapons. 393 million guns. That is more than one gun for every adult and child living in this country. We might as well place a gun in the bassinet of every new baby born. Welcome to America. Here is your gun. America owns almost half of all of the civilian-owned guns in the world. There are 330 million Americans in a world of 7.7 billion people. We are 4% of the global population and own 46% of the guns. The New York Times reports that researchers have consistently found this single fact as the variable that most explains America's high level of gun violence. Now, this element alone invites a kind of despair. There are so many guns already out there. They are not going anywhere, are they? Well, we may have some measure of control over this. We have control over the gun we may already own. And if that is you, I invite you to consider getting rid of it. People buy guns in part to feel a sense of control and safety in their home. And that is understandable. We all want to be safe. We want to keep our loved ones safe. The fact is, though, that keeping a gun in your home makes you less safe, not more safe. You are more likely to die of violence or accidental injury with a gun in your home. That is just a fact that everyone should know. Anytime you bring a consumer product into your home and it makes you more likely to die of violence, you should know about that. I just bought an electric lawnmower, and the 3 separate manuals that come with it have something like 9 million safety warnings about all the ways this thing could injure me. But guns are sold as if they make us safer. That is one of the selling points, and it borders on fraud. Because guns do not make households safer. They make you and your loved ones significantly less safe. Everyone should know that, just to be an informed consumer, if nothing else. And if we think of guns as a consumer product that happens to cause 40,000 unintentional deaths a year, this may lead us into a more productive conversation. Maybe the guns aren't going anywhere, but we could demand that they be made safer. Automobiles, perhaps the closest point of comparison to gun deaths in terms of the number, have been made 93% safer since their introduction in the 1920s. 93% safer. And we demanded speed limits and seatbelt laws and airbags and licenses and operator tests and restrictions and on and on. That isn't a perfect analogy. Cars don't exist to kill things. Guns are inherently dangerous. But this kind of thinking leads us out of an absolutist argument about guns versus no guns towards sensible, common-sense laws that reasonable people could agree on. And these laws could save lives. UUI member Steve Dunlop, who serves on the board of Hoosiers Concerned About Gun Violence, in a recent op-ed in the Indianapolis Star, points out that Massachusetts has gun regulations on its books that might have prevented 2 of the 3 mass shootings in Indianapolis this year. For example, a simple law requiring guns to be securely locked up inside the home, or a law requiring people subject to restraining orders to surrender their weapons. Remember, most gun violence deaths are not homicides. They are accidents or domestic disputes that tragically escalate when an instrument of lethal violence is readily available. Simple, common-sense laws aimed at reducing accidental or impulsive violence are not about taking away anyone's right to own a gun, and they can make a difference. Steve points out that you are 4 times more likely to die of gun violence in Indiana than in Massachusetts. Now, if owning a gun makes your own home more dangerous, then it stands to reason that bringing a gun into your home makes your community more dangerous. Guns get lost. They get stolen. They fall into the hands of people who take them out of the home and into the community. Gun ownership impacts the people around us. The conversation around smoking changed dramatically when it was realized that 30,000 people a year die of secondhand smoke. Smoking became viewed less as a matter of individual choice and more as a public health issue, and I'm indebted to Steve Dunlop for this insight. Viewing gun violence as a public health issue changes the conversation. It's not about my rights or your rights. It is about healthy communities. This public perspective makes sense as gun violence dramatically impacts families and communities far beyond the impact on just the individual who is victimized. In practical terms, just in Indiana, gun violence costs the public $6 billion every year. If we focus on creating safer communities, then progress is possible through proven, common-sense approaches that are outside the usual ideological debates. For example, since 2014, UUI, as a member of Faith in Indiana, has been working with community organizers, faith leaders, and committed people throughout Indianapolis to bring community-based gun violence reduction programs to Indianapolis. These programs recognize that when it comes to street violence, a small number of people are responsible for the majority of shootings. And so they target these people at high risk to kill or die from gun violence and offer them support and resources to make better choices and to embrace a different life. They say, we don't want you to kill, we don't want you to die from gun violence, and we're offering you a way out. In cities like Oakland, similar programs have reduced gun homicides by as much as 40%. Through the persistent education, advocacy, and relationship building of Faith in Indiana, Indianapolis has the beginnings of such a program in place. And Mayor Hogsett thanked them personally for their leadership on this issue at his State of the City address in 2019. The program still needs resources and support. We are not there yet, and UUI will be a part of that ongoing work here in Indy. And there's a promising potential that these approaches are getting some attention and support from the Biden administration. But unfortunately, when it comes to gun regulation, local progress is much more challenging. Because of the gun lobby-friendly politics of Indiana, local gun reform is always in danger of preemption at the state level. As Mayor Hogsett pointed out in a recent Indy Star editorial, Indiana has laws in place at the state level that forbid our cities from restricting or regulating gun ownership in almost any way. For example, it is illegal to require a city permit to carry a gun in Indianapolis, as New York City does. It would be illegal by Indiana state law for Indianapolis to use public funds to buy back guns here in Indianapolis. Steve Dunlop, in a private paper, notes that Indiana has no universal background checks, no registration of handguns, no state safe storage requirements, no restrictions on concealed carry licenses, and no requirement for a permit to purchase a handgun. There is a lot of room for common sense progress, but it has to happen at the state level. This is one of the reasons Faith in Indiana has broadened its focus to state-level advocacy, and UUI is a part of that as well. For example, our new Agents of Change team at UUI, working with Faith in Indiana, has organized a meeting in May with Representative Todd Houston, the Speaker of Indiana's House, to have a real conversation about our vision and priorities, including our support for these kinds of proven, effective gun violence reduction programs. Through efforts like this, Faith in Indiana has already had 54 conversations with public officials, local and state, on the issue of gun violence just this year. If you want to be a part of this kind of work, the UUI Agents of Change team would love for you to join them. You can email me and I will connect you. Last Sunday, following the shooting at the FedEx facility, the faith communities of Butler-Tarkington, including UUI, were asked by Dr. Leah Gunning Francis of Christian Theological Seminary to lead a response to gun violence in Indianapolis. She reached out to us because the governor lives right in our neighborhood. And so we gathered. We read the names of the dead. We lit candles outside the gates of the governor's mansion, and we presented a list of demands. And these demands were crafted in consultation with groups like Moms Demand Action and Faith in Indiana. And these were our demands. We call upon our governor to declare gun violence the public health crisis that it is, and dedicate state resources to curbing this epidemic, just as we have done with every other public health crisis. Specifically, we call on the governor to devote at least 5% of the $5.85 billion Indiana will receive from the American Rescue Plan to fund proven, community-based violence reduction programs across Indiana cities. We call upon our governor to convene a bipartisan coalition of lawmakers to enact legislative solutions to this crisis, and to boldly declare that addressing gun violence will no longer be a partisan issue, for we should all be able to agree that human lives are more important than our political affiliations. We call upon our governor to veto any laws passed that increase the presence of guns in our community or further exacerbate this crisis, such as permitless carry and efforts to expand racist and dangerous stand-your-ground laws. We call upon our governor, as well as Senator Young and Senator Braun, to advocate on both the state and federal levels for universal background checks to be required for all gun purchases, as well as bans on assault-style weapons, weapons that only serve to destroy human life. We call upon our governor to ensure access to mental health care is available to all people through increased health care funding and state resources deployed to connect those who need care with providers. We believe that gun violence should be a nonpartisan issue. We all want safe communities. We all grieve when lives are lost. There's no way to quantify the cost of our collective trauma, of the dehumanization and devaluing of life we all experience, in our collective fear and anxiety, in the tragic loss of human potential, in our broken hearts. I think of generations of children who grew up, who are growing up, participating in active shooter drills at schools year after year. What does this tell them about the world their adults envision for them? What does this tell them about the value their society places on them? What does this do to their sense of safety and security? It has been said that Sandy Hook was the end to America's gun debate. If that terrible nightmare did not move us to action, to change, then nothing will. I understand that resignation. This cycle of our response to violence is maddening and infuriating and so predictable. There's the shock of the breaking news, this sick feeling of no, not again, not another. There are expressions of outrage, terrible images of bodies on the ground, shell cases, survivors fleeing to safety, militarized police, loved ones wailing, weeping. A stunned community gathers in vigils and public memorials. Almost instantly, the same talking points emerge. Public officials piously intone that their thoughts and prayers are with the victims, and nothing is done. We have played this same tape over and over again. No way to prevent this, says Only Nation, where this regularly happens. Indeed, this isn't the first time I have preached about gun violence, or even the second, or the third, or the fourth. I am soul tired of reading lists of names, of marshaling statistics, of lighting candles. In our collective weariness, it is easy to become cynical and resigned. I'm asking you again to set aside any weariness, because the reality of 77 lives lost to gun violence in 4 months in our own backyard, it shocks the conscience, and it does not afford us the luxury of resignation. And here's one more action I offer you. The faith community of Butler-Tarkington is organizing a letter-writing campaign to amplify our demands. We will be asking you, people throughout our congregations and communities, to write letters to elected officials expressing your outrage, your insistence on action, and your demand for progress. We will provide some tools and language to make this easy to do. The campaign will begin on May 23rd, Pentecost in the Christian tradition, and end on June 4th, which is National Gun Violence Awareness Day. On June 4th, we will gather up the letters and hand-deliver them to our elected officials and again demand action. Details will be forthcoming. Today, I only ask if you will commit to writing a letter. If you will, you can email me at ministry@uui.org and say, I will. As people of faith, as people of faithfulness to a vision that intends something much greater for our children, that intends a beloved community of peace and human flourishing, we are called to be holders of hope for our communities. Through the weariness, through the cynicism, let us hold on to hope. Progress often seems farthest away just before it arrives. Let us be the bearers of hope in our communities, and as an expression of hope, let us take action. How much more loss can be borne? And if not now, tell me when. Blessed be, and amen.